They are unseen, unheard, and yet their intent is clear: to change the world for their own ends. They are manipulating the world through new technologies, giving us reality TV presidents, bringing down old empires to make way for a new form of one world rule, breaking up a European Union, fostering terrorism, and much more. But what is the real truth? Where did they come from? What are their beliefs? And who are they? We will track them down through time, discover their belief system, and therefore their intentions. By understanding these things, we will be able to more clearly see who they are. From their own master egos to their shady dealings with the Nazi Party and more, we will see the centre of their worldwide syndication: Bilderbergers, Trilateral Commission, Jesuits, Knights Templars, Opus Dei, MI6, CIA, and more are all implicated in our tale, and all are implicit in the grand plan. A plan we will reveal, ready to discover the truth. In order to find the true Illuminati, we must travel through time and space to find them in every culture of the world, over a period that reaches back into ancient Sumeria and Africa, and a landscape as diverse as South America and Japan. Yes, that is the truth, because the illumination or enlightenment this elusive group was seeking has been sought for generations and passed down like a golden thread through time. From one learned brother to another, from one master to the next, the secrets they held within their groups is almost as old as mankind. During the course of our researches, we will discover constantly recurring themes within the ritual and language employed by various cults, societies and religious organisations that all claim to be disparate groups. As the centuries fall by the wayside, we keep on finding the same keys that aid us in unlocking the door of mystery. And yet, one thing eludes us. What about now? We must discover the truth about the Illuminati, and the question of whether they are still manipulating the people of the world has to be answered. We have plenty of scope, and we have some incredible starting places. Should we begin with the Templars and trace their Masonic descent as others have? Should we look at Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati and search the shadows for men in black? Certainly, all could trace their descent from the solar serpentine cults of ancient times, and all still hold many of the rituals and beliefs to be found in the earliest of cults. It is true that there will be Freemasons or Catholics or any other number of groups that will be listening to this now, wondering what we are talking about. The truth is that the majority of the members of such groups have no knowledge at all about what lies at the centre of their own particular wheel. This wheel can be a metaphor for how we see the world of secret societies. The outer rim is the face of the society, whether Mason or Bilderberg. This rim is going much too fast to see what the centre of the wheel is doing, but it is the rim that takes the full brunt of the road. One side of the rim cannot see what the other side is doing, or that it even exists. The centre can see what is happening in all directions from its position of power and is distanced from it, whilst holding all the spokes in its grasp. If you can see the rim, then you are not the centre. By the fact that there exists rim at all, we know there must be a centre. The same is true in the world of secret societies. To the world, which is the road, all we see is the rim. We see the whole rim over time as the wheel moves, and then cycles around again and again. This is why history repeats itself. But we are just like those who are on the rim. We cannot see the centre of the wheel from our perspective, and so we must deduce from the existence of the rim that there must be spokes and a centre. So the only way to work out what is in the centre of the wheel is to see the whole rim and to try to deduce what the centre would be like. We need to write down a few of the candidates for the job of our outer rim secret society, or suspicious organisation. These include the following: Freemasons, Knights of Malta, Knights Templar, Opus Dei, Jesuits, Priory of Sion or the Merovingian bloodline claim, the CIA or MI5 and other secret services, the original Illuminati, Rosicrucians, and the Chinese Triad. Now all we need to do is see if all these positions on the rim revolved around the same centre. Let's look at the Freemasons and their origin. The history and origin of the Freemasons is not a simple subject. In fact, it is virtually impossible to decipher. And the myriad histories fed into thousands of books on the subject. Many Masonic historians try desperately to claim that their lineage stretches right back to the Temple of Solomon and the builder Hiram Abiff. They are even told it as a fact in their ceremonies. Others claim descent from Roman and Greek stonemasons and the Roman augurs, who had special knowledge of the lay of the land and energies related to our modern day perception of ley lines and feng shui. There can be no strict proof for any of this, albeit likely that the secret knowledge has been passed down the centuries from one adept and initiate to another. The general consensus has the Freemasons emerging from the medieval stonecutters, who are known as operative masons. They are skilled craftsmen who built the great cathedrals and churches of Europe for the Catholic Church, and who included many mysterious images and secrets within their amazing carvings. They were known as soft masons or Freemasons, as the carving was free work or soft stone. This version of the history of the Masons claims the lodge evolved from the huts erected on site by those medieval masons. As time progressed, the Masons grew in power due to the demand for their services and formed groups or unions which became known as lodges. By the 1600s, the lodges began admitting men who were not operative masons and were termed gentlemen masons. The terms developed over time within the operative Masonic lodges and were taken on by those gentlemen masons, becoming part and parcel of their ritual nature. However, there are problems with this version of history. The facts state something quite different, although there is no reason to deny that gentlemen did indeed begin to grow in number within the ranks of the Masons. There is indeed plenty of evidence to show that in the 14th century the Masons were already a well-established group and indeed accepted or were evolved by the inclusion of the Knights Templar that had escaped Catholic suppression to Scotland. The first official documentation we have is from 1356 and is actually from England and describes the formation of the London Masons' Company and the ordinances governing the lodge that was already established at York Minster. However, these are not the only papers that have survived and speak of groups that were forming. It does not deny the fact that there must have been pre-existing groups that do not have paperwork to prove their pre-existence. The only odd evidence we do have is the symbolism being employed within the great building works of Europe from the 11th century. Now, understanding that this great building exercise erupted with such a vengeance following the First Crusade, and the setting up of such organisations as the Knights Templar and Cistercians, who themselves were incidental in bringing back building skills to Europe, is the first part of the puzzle. The Templars and their non-warrior cousins, the Cistercians, were more than incidental in both bringing back the seed of alchemical enlightenment from the Crusades, but also the building skills of the Islamic Middle Eastern world. This is seen in the arch and the octagonal designs incorporated into most Templar and Cistercian buildings, as well as other building works carried out under their tutelage. But also into these structures are huge amounts of numerological symbols and mystical metaphors. These methods were understood and carried on by the Freemasons, who today ritualize these ancient ways and probably do not even understand their correct purpose. These mystical building metaphors are as ancient as Stonehenge or the Great Pyramids, even if the term Freemason is not. By the mid-17th century, there is definite evidence of large-scale Masonic lodges as Elias Ashmole, the creator of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, records in his diary that he was made a mason in the lodge at his father-in-law's house. Many today split up the Masonic lodges into operative, accepted and free masonry. However, they are much like the Catholic Church's subgroups and the monasteries like Cistercians, Franciscans and even Jesuits. They are all from the same original source. The Bible, and specifically the Temple of Solomon, gave them a religious and acceptable framework to work on, and the symbolism employed with the operative mason's tools was worked to match the ancient mysteries such as the as above so below Hermetic principle. Today the Freemasons are a global phenomenon, with members from across the business community, religious establishments and politics. The influence they have is obviously huge and universal. They have links with many other orders, such as the Sovereign Order of the Knights of Malta, and have had over the years a lot of bad press for the influence they have brought to bear. They have swallowed up other institutions, such as the 18th century Weishaupt Illuminati. Part of this influence has been shown by hundreds of authors who have had effect all over the world and have been more than incidental in the instigating of full or part the revolutions in France, Russia and even the American War of Independence. A lot of the historical texts seem to point at a war between the Catholic Church and the Freemasons. This is an interesting point, and one that confuses many people when they see that the Masons are actually linked and were created by the Catholic Church. This is a standard ploy used by Secret Service people across the world, and even to be found within the statutes of many secret societies and even religious orders. It was the done thing, to appear on the outside to be against the powers of authority, whilst all the time working for them. To win a football match, own both sides. The facts were fairly clear on this one. The Freemasons can clearly be shown to have evolved from esoteric sects emanating from within the Catholic Church, and as a direct result of Templar influence in Scotland. So the Masons could be traced back to the Catholic Church. So what influence does the Guild of Freemasons have today? Well, as businessmen, no, plenty of other business people, and there is a very large number of them that have the handshake. Many of these are small businessmen, but as the sea is made up of many drops of water, it is still water. Many of them are more than that though, and are quite big and influential in the business world. Almost cyclically the public get outraged by newspaper stories about Masonic influence, and we have a purge. People forget newspaper stories very quickly, and the influence of the Masons carries on as before. The Masons have also been implicated in many communistic activities, and certainly in the Russian Revolution, a country, it will be noted, was orthodox and therefore too far removed from Catholicism. So, there is a lot of influence brought to bear by the Masons around the world. Most presidents of America, prime ministers, in fact world leaders, tend to be connected to the Freemasons, let alone the royal families, who are patrons, and even bishops and cardinals. So, this goes back to the Templars, a Catholic order. It also goes back to the Knights of St. John or Knights of Malta. Both the Templars and the Knights of Malta have re-emerged from within the Masons and are now orders themselves, in various forms. Most still owe allegiance to the Masons, but are distinct. The Knights of Malta can directly be traced back to their origin and are now located in the Vatican. Now, the Jesuits are certainly part of the Catholic Church and originally influenced the Illuminati. They created a secular and separate society which later formed back into the Masons, which were created by the Catholics anyway. There is appearing a glimmer of that central part of the wheel. Before the Illuminati merged into the Masons, they had been implicated in the creation of several other groups, such as the Rosicrucians, Golden Dawn, and even the Lutherans and Protestants. There is one group which came to light in the 1980s, which sent a shiver down the spine of the world: P2, or Propaganda Due. This group were a Masonic group set up in the 19th century Italy by the Grand Orient Lodge of Italy. In 1976, the Freemasons closed down P2, but it continued under its own authority. Originally, it evolved specifically out of the Carbonari, or charcoal burners, a spurious title to attract the people, no doubt, and the name of one of the most murderous societies ever to have existed. They were even written about by Conan Doyle in his Sherlock Holmes stories. In the 1820s, this group of charcoal burners were more than just powerful. They virtually ran the country. Their origins are amazingly similar to the Masons in that they claim to have begun in Scotland, the famed resting place of the last Knights Templar. They claim that Queen Isabel of Scotland was on the throne when the King of France was Francis. Francis made contact with a bunch of successful mystics when he stayed into their territory. They were called charcoal burners, and their territory was Scotland. Something is afoot here though, as France does not share a frontier with Scotland. Neither was there a Queen Isabel. The very idea of the Carbonari being mystics and from Scotland seems fanciful, but it is based upon beliefs of origin. They believe they originated there, and so who are we to doubt them? In fact, it tells us their true origin lies within the Masonic order, and via them to the Templars. It also tells us that they believe their origins to be mystics, those individuals who experience part of the Enlightenment process. P2, who claim descent from the Carbonari, came to the forefront in the 1980s scandal of the Banco Ambrosiano. This was one of Milan's principal banks, which collapsed in 1982 with debts of between $700 million and $1.5 billion, followed quickly by the death of its president, Roberto Calvi, who was found hanging, like a mason, under Blackfriars Bridge. Blackfriars Bridge is a notoriously Masonic symbolic location of Italian design. Calvi, who fled Italy following the collapse of the bank, and so was not intending suicide, which is generally done in one's own backyard, and so it must have been murder. It appears from the information we could gather that the money had actually been siphoned off by the Institute of Religious Works, a Catholic church front, and so the 80 million lira that the Catholic Church was complaining about losing was actually going back into the Catholic Church. Calvi was implicated in his affair and was later found to be a member of the secret P2 Lodge, and which had been missed by many for its real importance. The story goes that there is a villa in Tuscany where, hidden in the courtyard, there is a ritual fountain shaped like a rearing cobra, with an inflated hood and a single eye. Inside this all-seeing eye is a camera which keeps check on visitors. This is the striking cobra, the great one-eyed shining one of the very centre of a modern-day secret society with links into the heart of Catholicism and implicated in the assassination of none other than Pope John Paul I. The next thing that happened in Italy following the revelations of P2 was the collapse of the government. If this is not political influence, then what is? Let us now turn to the Bilderbergers. The Bilderberger Group is an informal, secretive, transatlantic council of key decision-makers developed between 1952 and 1954. It brought leading European and American personalities together once a year for informal discussions of their differences. The formation of the American wing of Bilderberg was entrusted to Eisenhower's Psychological Warfare Coordinator, C.D. Jackson, and the funding for the first meeting held at the Hotel de Bilderberg in Holland in 1954 was provided by the CIA. Therefore, much of its funding came from the Ford Foundation. The subjects over which the annual meetings ranged were wide, but it is clear that the 1957 Treaty of Rome was nurtured by discussions at Bilderberg the previous year. This modern-day group of the powerful elite has been accused on an international basis of forming the brains behind a new world order. On the other hand, they themselves claim that the Bilderberg Group is simply a meeting of those in power in order to discuss, in a free and easy way, the concerns of the world leaders. What does appear to come out of this meeting are two other groups, also called to account by the conspiracy theorists, namely the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations. One of the key institutions that has fostered unity and cooperation with the Atlantic community beyond the old concepts has been the Bilderberger Group. The origins of this group rest with one man, Joseph Ratzinger, a Catholic who had links to the Jesuit order. He even recommended the turning of Hungary, Austria and Poland into a tripartite state under the guidance of the Jesuit order. The plan was dropped. Sir Edward Bennington Behrens said, "I remember Ratzinger in the United States picking up the telephone and immediately making an appointment with the President, and in Europe he had complete entree into every political circle as a kind of right acquired through trust, devotion and loyalty he inspired." With a good war record, Ratzinger was certainly involved in secret and underground works, even parachuting into occupied Germany at the age of 58. He founded the European movement, which gave rise to the Council of Europe in 1949. Ratzinger believed in unity, and to that end it did not really matter how the unity was brought about. He certainly liked to be involved with big business and the influence that they created within the general public. We are, after all, tied to our television screens and led by marketing men. The political and religious differences in the world which created the disunity between certain states, he believed, could be brought together through a corporate ideal. If everybody wanted the same thing, they would all be the same. A market-led revolution was, and strangely still is, taking place. Russia, as the USSR collapsed and is now in the process of commercialization, the same will be and is true of China. This commercialization is creeping across the world like an invading force. In many respects, this could be seen as a kind of communism by the back door, which has been claimed was instigated by the Masons on the orders of the Catholic Church, or even Illuminati. Anyway, Ratzinger did have left-wing policies, and with this connection to the Jesuits, there are obvious links to take into consideration, not least of which is the Catholic Church. Involving Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, Ratzinger began his crusade by starting on America, who he believed to be essential to world peace. The prince held an important position in Royal Dutch Petroleum, or Shell, and was involved in several international corporations, and so had influence that the Americans and others would respect. In 1952, it was proposed by Ratzinger that there should be an open and frank discussion between the disparate organisations and individuals that controlled the world. This should be in secret to allow those taking part to air their views without the worry of it appearing in the newspapers the next day. This was the birth of the Bilderberger Group, which was named after the hotel where the meetings were originally held. In short, Bilderberg is a recognised, flexible and informal international leadership forum in which different viewpoints can be expressed and mutual understanding enhanced. And now we turn to the Trilateral Commission. According to their own words, the Trilateral Commission was formed in 1973 by private citizens in Japan, Europe and North America to foster closer cooperation among those core democratic, industrialised areas of the world with shared leadership responsibilities in the wider international system. Originally established for 3 years, our work has been renewed for successive triennia or 3-year periods. The Trilateral Commission is a private organisation, founded in 1973 at the initiative of David Rockefeller. It consists of over 300 private citizens from the 3 areas of Europe, Japan and North America, and is there to promote closer cooperation between these 3 areas. There has been a lot of scrutiny on the Trilateral Commission, and it has been implicated strongly in many conspiracy theories. However, With as many members as it has, there is no surprise that some of them will be connected to other organisations, such as the Catholic Knights of Malta, Jesuits and Freemasons. Not least of these is Mr. Rockefeller, former president of the Chase Manhattan Bank and corporate king. A powerful organisation with links to all other groups. And now we turn to the Rosicrucians. The earliest real documentation of the Rosicrucian ideals is from 1597. It is said that a certain alchemist travelled across Europe seeking to begin a society to carry out his newly discovered alchemical ideals. The Pharma Fraternitas and a general reformation of the world appeared in 1614 as fully fledged documents, and so he must have succeeded. The founder is claimed to be a Christian Rosenkreuz, which is obviously a false name and means the rosy cross of the Christians. It is claimed that this character travelled across Arabia, studied at Fez in Egypt, and returned to Europe with his message. A message, we might add, that is decidedly ancient and was originally created by the Sumerian Shining Ones. The origin of this enigmatic group then is false, and therefore created by whoever did begin the order. What clues do we have? The coat of arms of Martin Luther, that staunch anti-Catholic, included the rose and cross. There are also parallels with Arabic Illuminati schools, such as those of the Gilani, who was known as the Shining Rose. However, when we look at the origins of Masonry and the rituals and beliefs held within, we actually find they are not dissimilar. It appears that Rosicrucianism is yet another form of that Catholic breed, diaspora, just like the Jesuit creation of the Illuminati, drawing on the undercurrents of mysticism to create a seemingly anti-self organisation. Just like the Freemasons, the Alumbrados or Illuminated Ones, the Illuminati and dozens of other groups around at the time, the Rosicrucian ways were linked to the influential Sufi mystics who had influenced the world for such a long time. The methods required the deepest of concentration upon the master, that absolute adherence to the way was normal. It was another method of control, and the void left behind by the strictness and rigidity of Catholicism was easily filled by hundreds of such groups, including the emerging Protestants. Today the Rosicrucians are a worldwide order with thousands of members, but their influence on the world now is minimal, although there is a hint in one of their books which tells us that their influence of the person or soul they call the ego will keep returning to constantly make alterations to the way forward for mankind. Though by many outsiders the existence of Christian Rosenkreuz is regarded as a myth, it is nevertheless true that his birth marked the beginning of a new epoch in the spiritual life of the Western world. That particular ego has also been in continuous incarnation ever since, in one form or another, of European countries, taking a new body as his successive vehicles outlived their usefulness, or circumstances rendered it expedient that he changed the scene of his activities. Moreover, he is incarnate today, an initiate of high degree, an active and potent factor in all affairs of the West. Although unknown to the world, he is the Grand Master of the Illuminati. As are all such individuals, he is a representative at a central conclave of the Elder Brothers of humanity. His mission was, and is, to show the spiritual significance of all scientific discoveries, thus counteracting as far as possible the deadening influence of materialistic science, which the Elder Brothers dread more than any other manifestation of human activity. To this end, he laboured with the alchemists centuries before the advent of modern science. He, through an intermediary, inspired the now mutilated works of Bacon, Jacob Boehm, and others received through him the inspiration which makes their work so spiritually illuminating. In the works of the immortal Goethe and the masterpieces of Wagner, the same influence meets us. It is the same source or ego from where all spiritual illumination has derived. This particular ego has been manifesting itself throughout time. However, It is the same shining influence throughout man's history that has been making these moves, stepping in and out of the scene as cerebral evolution has moved mankind forward. These Rosicrucians call this influence the central conclave of the Elder Brothers. We call them the Shining Ones or Illuminati. The same process of illumination is held within the secrets of Rosicrucianism. It hides from the profane, but reveals to the initiate the more clearly how he is to labour day by day to make for himself that choicest of all gems, the Philosopher's Stone, more precious than the Koh-i-Noor, than the sum of all earthly wealth. Apparently Christ himself wrought this marvellous stone while incarnate in the body of Jesus. The Reichsanzeiger said in one article, "Yes, there is a Philosopher's Stone. It is an elixir of life. It is all, and much more than has ever been claimed for it. Moreover, most people have had it in their hands often, but know it not." How true that is, yet at the same time how thoroughly misleading. None can guess save those who know the secret, but even the eavesdropping traitor who had listened and overheard the words spoken among the brethren could have profited thereby. The writer of this text then points out that to those who have entitled to the knowledge, many a mystery will reveal itself between the lines in this work, suggested but not spoken, for to reveal them, save from the lip to ear to worthy persons and under proper circumstances, would be a grievous breach of faith, not to be contemplated. The secrets held within the pages of that 1910 book are simply now to behold, and upon the reading the text, keeping in mind the spiritual experience outlined by the existence of the Shining Ones, reveals nothing more than the enlightenment experience, the illumination of the Illuminati. We are even told that in order to become an initiate, we cannot simply apply. We will be watched from the sidelines, and our merits in this life counted towards being offered the golden key to the temple. Of course, in 1910 there was no World Wide Web, and today we find this once influential secret society now offering courses with credit card payments. Although they still claim to be teachers of the mysteries and custodians of the sacred teachings of a spiritual power more potent in the life of the Western world than any of the visible governments, though they may not interfere with humanity so as deprive them of their free will. Of course, reading between the lines, this implies that they are indeed an invisible government. This secret government take the form of 7 brothers who go out into the world whenever occasion requires, appearing as men among other men, or working in their invisible vehicles with or upon others as needed. Yet it must be strictly kept in mind that they never influence anyone against their will or contrary to their desires, but only strengthen good wherever found. Of course, a person's will is dependent upon what has already been influencing him or her, and good is relative. We must now turn to the Nazi Party, in growing the Thule Society, which came out of the German order. This Thule Society was a new secret group based supposedly upon ancient Nordic mythology, but in reality was more Eastern than most writers realise. In holding secret meetings and issuing death orders, this murderous method of political change had been brought to the German Thule Society by von Sebottendorf, who spread the word through his newspaper interests. Franz Gertner, the then President of Police in Munich, was a member of the Inner Circle and later became Minister of Justice under the Third Reich. The Thule Society served as the recruiting and political platform front of the German order. In 1918, the Workers' Political Circle, with the Thule Society representative Karl Harrer as chairman, was set up, and in 1919, after a fabled island much like Atlantis or Lemuria, it was believed to have been situated somewhere in the north and was lost a long time ago, along with its highly developed and intelligent civilization. But the secrets of this ancient race were not lost. They were instead to be found within the myths and mysteries of the ancient world. Amazingly, followers of the Thule Society believe that their masters hiding in the background, who occasionally influenced the human race just as the Theosophists and Rosicrucians believed, these were the Great White Brotherhood, or Illuminati. Only the true initiate could establish contact with these masters through magic ritual, and once contacted, the initiate would be empowered with great skills and superhuman strength. These extra skills were given to enable the initiate to create the conditions for the master race, the Aryans, to populate the earth and thus exterminate the inferior races. This element of extermination was more obvious during the war, was in charge of the propaganda in the Thule Society. There are literally hundreds of instances we could cite to show that the Thule Society and other secret societies were inciting all kinds of changes within Europe. But just those few collated facts are sufficient to show us. This is indeed true. The Catholic Church did remain quiet, and there were individuals within the Church that stood up for the rights of man. However, there is a darker side to the Catholic role in the running of the Nazi war and Holocaust machines. As a child, Adolf Hitler attended classes at a Benedictine monastery, which is where he first saw the now infamous swastika. Here he sang it in the choir and claimed that he dreamt one day of taking holy orders, thus showing early on his allegiance to the Catholic Church. "I am now, as before, a Catholic and will always remain so," he is reported to have said to one of his generals. The Catholic Church, in fact, never excommunicated him. The stark fact remains that the Catholic Church turned a blind eye to the Nazi oppression, especially as it had just spent the last few centuries trying to rid the world of Jewry itself. In fact, taken to this end, and the hidden links between Freemasonry and the Catholic Church, we can start to see a picture of a Christian purging of the Jews in process, a process that appears to have been going on for an awful long time. Some have claimed, however, that this was a balancing act, in that the Jews were getting too powerful in Europe at the time and needed trimming. The Catholic deal with the Nazis involved having further privileges for its priests and even permission to get involved in the public school system, with a massive $400 million of state aid. All in all, the Catholic Church was doing quite well out of the process. A Concordat with the Catholic Church in 1933 stated the following: "The German Reich guarantees the freedom of the profession and public exercise of the Catholic religion, and that Catholics shall enjoy the protection of the state in the same manner as the employees of the state." It goes on: "The teaching of the Catholic religion in the elementary, vocational, secondary and superior schools shall be a regular subject, and shall be given in conformity with the principles of the Catholic Church." To the Catholics this was all perfect, and so why should they make life hard for the Nazis? To the Nazis the deal was perfect. They gained prestige and seemingly backing from the Roman Catholics. They also needed to ensure that their allies of the future, Italy, would not be upset. Many authors have in fact shown that even following the end of the war, the Nazis were aided in their escapes by their brothers in the Catholic Church, escaping via monasteries and nunneries, and into deeply Catholic countries in South America, especially with the aid of certain Jesuits. Franz von Papen was the Chancellor of Germany between 1932 and 33, and first Vice-Chancellor of the Third Reich under Adolf Hitler. Papen has been called Hitler's mentor, and to this end he should have theoretically known what Hitler himself was thinking. Papen gives us an insight into these thoughts in his book My Conversations with Hitler. Hitler has put into practice the high ideals of the papacy. What exactly Papen means by this we really cannot say, but it implies the obvious, that Adolf Hitler was working directly for the Pope. So who is von Papen? It turns out that without Papen, Hitler would have struggled to gain power. Papen made the way smooth for Hitler's rise to power, as is shown by him receiving the Vice-Chancellery following Hitler gaining the Chancellery. Papen was born to a very wealthy Catholic family in Westphalia and served in the First World War in Turkey, where he was to serve again during the Second World War as ambassador. On his return from the First World War, he joined politics on the far right and in 1932 was plucked from obscurity by President Hindenburg to be Chancellor. It was this friendship that allowed Hitler's rise to power, with the Hitler Youth, and signing the Concordat between the Vatican and Munich. Incidentally, the Cardinal Secretary of State who signed the document on the Vatican's behalf was Archbishop Eugenio Pacelli. And so we turn to another Catholic order, the Knights of Malta. This order can truly be traced back to the Crusades in one long and perfect historical line, without wondering whether it reformed or not. There are some modern orders that have similar names, but they are mimicking the true order, which is now in Rome, after having been kicked out of Rhodes and Malta by several invading armies. As the Knights of St. John, they were highly influential, much like the Templars, and were linked to the Hospitallers in Malta. When the Templars were disbanded, a lot of them simply merged with the Knights of St. John, and took with them their mystical ways and knowledge. Now they have connections across the world, and are a sovereign order, which means they have ambassadors and hold political sway, as well as the all-important diplomatic immunity. It maintains diplomatic relations with Europe, North America, South America and Asia with the authority of the Holy See. It has specialised agencies in the United Nations and other international organisations. In the UK, the Order of St. John of Jerusalem is a branch of the Knights of Malta, and out of it came the Order of the Garter, to which the main players in old politics in the UK must be affiliated. They are directly responsible to the Pope and have linked by hundreds of conspiracy theories to many scandals. For instance, in the 1980s, Colonel Oliver North authorised an exchange of guns for drugs to finance the Contras in Nicaragua. In order to sort this out, Colonel North needed connections in the underworld and got involved with the Mafia, the CIA and many other shady organisations and characters. One of these was Al Capone, who was also a colonel in the US Army. He was also a member of the Sovereign Military Order of the Knights of Malta. So far then, we have found nothing new about the world. All of this information is widely available at the click of a mouse. But what is new in thinking is that all of these branches are just from one tree. They have all been spawned from the same mother and father, and they can all be traced down the evolutionary timeline and back to ancient Sumeria and the Illuminated ones. Take the Freemasons. They are supposedly a God-fearing Protestant organisation doing good for the community. They can be proven to have come from the Catholic Templars. The Templars showed allegiance to the Catholic Church and the Pope. The Catholic Church sprang from a Roman imperialistic intrusion into the world of religion. These religions were all basically following the same beliefs and all emerged from the creation of the Sons of Light, otherwise known as the Essene. These were early Gnostics, Christians who wrote the New Testament in Qumran. The Christian play, that of Jesus, was a set-up by the Essene, which means the Shining Ones, and who stretched back into Egypt, and from Egypt to ideas were mixed from Sumeria. There can be no revealing of them today, as their beliefs have dissipated into the Mother Church of Catholicism. If any organisation on the globe is still the Shining Ones, then we do not need to look at secret societies, bankers or businessmen. We do not need to turn to the disbanded historical Illuminati and Men in Black. We do not have to go to a few innocent Freemasons who have no idea what it is they are really worshipping. The true Shining Ones are out in the open, and they are still proselytising like never before. They are still forming new branches, still grafting onto the vine. They paradoxically hide behind others, and yet fear no man. They are the most powerful, non-governmental organisation on the globe, and have been for centuries. They have wealth that even the United States would envy, and yet declare poverty. They have a presence in every single country in the world like no other. They have their hands in just about every cloak and dagger society we could mention, and instigated most of them. They feverishly cling to secrecy and declare openness. They control the minds of billions and influence the rest. They make policy that governments have to adhere to. They are the Catholic Church. The story of the Illuminati, or Shining Ones, and the ancient belief systems they employed is complex. There is good reason for the complexity involved, however. The small-time beginnings of the Shining Ones in the tribal unit where the medicine men gained control through subtle psychological manipulation, and his mysterious skills, gathered over vast periods of time, are humble in origin. The understanding of a deeper truth and of ways seemingly foreign to us are now given various names by the scientific community. His apparent control of cycles and navigation gave the shaman his air of authority and mystery. Using his understanding of the patterns and cycles of the solar and stellar universe and their relationship to mankind gave him an edge, a unique selling point and perspective on man that was his sole ownership. This knowledge kept him in power for centuries, and it is this understanding of the origin of the Shining One, or Illuminati, that we need to understand in order to evade the obvious trip into Alice's Wonderland, for many have actually seen the similarities that abound and given voice to them as being derived from alien, Atlantean, or even subterranean origin. Yes, these people would seem alien and angelic. Yes, they would seem to have come from a time of sunken islands and ages of mystery. Yes, they may have even come from underground, but only these things if you ignore the law of human nature. This law states that man will follow if he is shown the way, especially if there is a promise of something wonderful at the end of the journey. The holiday trip of a lifetime was offered to mankind by these very ordinary human beings, and they succeeded in gathering a huge following with the promise of salvation through enlightenment. The mystical magician guided man on a path he was crying out to walk. There is no need for aliens, angels or Atlantis in this scenario. Occasionally the products offered by the Shining Ones need repackaging. Sometimes it needed research and a new image was created from this research, opening up new fields of exploitation. The medicine man began and ended with healing. From physical well-being to spiritual dynamics, the process was intertwined like the coiling of the snake. Different words were used for the same practice, and the languages of the separate cultures helped to make the practices seem different. The art of the various civilizations aided the ethnic variance, and as if by magic, there seemed to be a cultural difference. Along the history of the way, these new names and languages opened up or created the opportunities for hiding the amazing knowledge of manipulation in myth, and therefore power remained with the initiated. The picture now, thousands of years and millions of words later, is clouded, so much so that truth itself is difficult and in fact impossible to know. All we do know is that there is more to the story than we have been led to believe. The standard history books tell the story of the surface, of what's happened, but not always why. Sometimes a history is cultivated to grow in a certain way and at certain speeds, creating the story required. The danger is that this itself takes away the reality of the story. It hides even more than the symbolism, the truth. Behind the standard histories of the nations there is a folklore, myth and legend. Very carefully the real truths were hidden in these alternative histories. Those with the eyes to see could observe the reality, the truth. The others were content with what they believed to be the truth. Kings, queens and politicians have been at the forefront of these standard histories, keeping the masses happy with a natural order and democracy of life. We only vote those into power who want power. Should we breed our leaders to be what we want them to be? Democracy in that respect is a false democracy. Of course, through history we have bred our leaders, we called them kings, but even this fell into or was created by the ones who wanted power. Nothing seems to be more corrupt than man. Behind the scenes of our history, a massive and relatively untold story is hidden. Who now, after 2,000 years, will believe that Jesus lived after his crucifixion and travelled abroad? Who will see him as just another solar deity? Time is one of the greatest convincers. The essence of the truth has been hidden from us. The story we are force-fed from birth has seeped into our minds, and over time we have literally come to accept it as fact. Faith and time build a strong wall of belief, which becomes so great nothing will break it down, except maybe a constant barrage over time. The belief created was taken on by the faithful, who wrote down in the histories which we now believe, and without knowledge perpetuated the lie which they were part of. Nobody was or is impartial. All books, all writings are based upon a bias of some kind. That is one of the first rules any historian or investigator must understand. When looking back at what was written, understand that somebody wanted to make a point of some kind, and it was always their point, not the opposition's. Biased toward a religion, a leader, a war, and even a product. St. Nicholas, the great figure of Christmas for so many, was not originally dressed in red. It began his career as white, with a white beard. Who now would see a fat man with a white beard and a white suit and say it was Santa Claus? Many years ago, Coca-Cola took the white image and made history with it, creating the now familiar red-garbed jolly-looking Father Christmas. They altered our perception of what his age-old saint was. This was just a clever marketing campaign. So too is religion. It may take another few thousand years for mankind to see things differently, to understand that what we have been lied to, unless a better marketing campaign emerges from within the inner sanctum of the Shining Ones. 100 years ago, the idea of an ancient priesthood was hinted at by Edward Carpenter in his book Pagan and Christian Creeds. He wrote, referring back to the existence of something resembling a great world religion, which has come down through the centuries, continually expanding and branching in the process. The idea was there, the notion that there simply must have been more to all this evidence. Even now we grasp at other reasons for the shocking data. Take Eric von Daniken, who says the only way to explain these correspondences is to assume that there must, at the dawn of time, have been a single original teaching, otherwise it would have been mentioned in historical records. The general consensus ever since has been the now familiar independent eruption theory, that all over the globe these beliefs were somehow evolving quite separately. 100 years ago, this idea was accepted quite easily. Time has served us well in this way and aided our perspective. We no longer need to assimilate religious ideas or tread carefully around touchy Victorian religious intolerance. Since the ideas of independent eruption or evolution in the realms of belief, we have discovered that world travel was definitely possible. Actual archaeological discoveries are happening constantly, showing that earlier and earlier civilizations did indeed travel long distances in quite sophisticated ways. Evidence of early travel is glossed over or forgotten, deemed to be irrelevant and dangerous. Writers were almost afraid to appear too factual about myths and treated them instead like some great classical literature, which was where as an art form, not history. Nobody wanted to be shot down by science. Unfortunately, attitudes like this can stop the equally creative urges required for good investigative historical research. Now, however, we can read old myths with the understanding that they do hold truth, just not how we originally perceived. The truth is hidden and needs reading from a different angle. Symbolism speaks of a deeper truth. An exciting new way can now be opened up. New interpretations of old and discarded historical material will gradually throw light into a darkened world of certainty. But they now also have technology on their side. Control of the internet, mobile phones, apps and more is under the control of the same capitalist elite and monitored by governments full to brim of the old boys. They see and hear everything. They are building up huge amounts of data on their subjects, and they use it to control us. It has been proven that those in power have manipulated us on massive scales for recent elections and national referendums. This power is not going away. It will in fact build and become even more powerful as they utilise artificial intelligence for the purposes of a free, peaceful and united world. Their ultimate goal is on sight, a one world government. It will just appear in a different form than we previously envisaged. But will they take kindly to being exposed, or will they simply watch the boat float on the river of time and remain unexposed and mocking? If they do still exist, then we take our hats off to them and their marvellous ingenuity over the many centuries. We are but individuals. They are many, and have time and vast knowledge on their side.